directed by Brad Michael Elmore, is a 2019 vampire film starring transgender actress Nicole Maines as transgender protagonist Laurel. Aside from the groundbreaking premise of an openly transgender lead in a teen vampire film, the film has a front and center queer feminist focus, and it ends with a subversive anarchist sentiment respecting all genders. Elmore put in the research as a cisgender male ally, and it shows, resulting in a film remarkably minimal in sexist or transphobic content, if a little lacking in thematic thrust due to authorial ignorance of the trans-feminist struggle. Overall, it's a decent, if tame, model for how films like this could be made in the future. The general plot is, more or less, a gender-flipped version of 1987's The Lost Boys, with a teen coming-of-age narrative about joining a gang of vampires. Except while The Lost Boys director Joel Schumacher needed to bury his gay themes in subtext to get it into a mainstream 80s family film, Elmore is able to have overt lesbian sexuality and trans themes in a modern unrated indie flick. It also reminds me of James Franco's 2016 Mother May I Sleep with Danger lesbian vampire redux, to the extent that I suspect Bit began as Elmore watching the film and imagining how he would do it better. If so, it resolves all the issues that I had with it. Also, the original Mother May I Sleep with Danger film of 1996 has a protagonist named Laurel. Just saying. The film starts with Laurel's narration.
You know those teen vampire movies that feel like the horny soap opera fever dreams of a sentient 8th grade diary? Here's how this one ended. Here's how mine began.
As we open on a female vampire, Siren, played by Julia Voth, welcoming her boyfriend to vampirehood and telling him the relevant rules. Sunlight makes you sick, but only fire can kill you. Whatever, your vampires, your rules. At least they don't call vampires nightwalkers.
I'm a nightwalker.
However, she has violated her clan's main rule, no boys. The vampire leader, Duke, played by Diana Hopper, comes in and has Siren restrained, while she taunts and kills the boyfriend. Duke specifically mocks him for thinking that he's the hero of the story, like Spider-Man getting bitten by a radioactive spider. She underlines his lack of empowerment, orders Siren be imprisoned for a year, says, "No boys," and then the title appears in a distinctly feminine style. A moment later, we see Laurel. It took me a while to figure out that this was supposed to be a trans-feminine twist in a way that doesn't work by casting Maines, who passes as a cis woman with ease. I'm pretty sure Elmore intended Laurel's voice to sound masculine.
You know those teen vampire movies that feel like the horny soap opera fever dreams of a sentient 8th grade diary? Here's how this one ended. Here's how mine began.
So that when we see this dude, we would think that he was the one narrating. It would then come as a big twist when he dies in the cold open, as Duke mocks him for thinking he's the star. No boys would emphasize the feminine twist, and how trans women are relevant to the gender dynamics of this vampire clan. It's similar to one of Joss Whedon's twisty feminist scenes, like the slim blonde in the alleyway, turning out to be the vampire slayer, and not the victim, or the scared blonde with a boyfriend who hears something he insists is nothing, turning out to be the vampire and eating him. Whedon's scenes are effective for the simple feminist twists that he likes, but this scene falls flat due to Elmore's ignorance of the complexity of the transgender subject. Some trans people sound like they're assigned gender, but others just don't. In the case of Maines, early medical intervention prevented the growth of the part of the throat that enables traditionally masculine low-pitch resonance. Other trans women have theirs surgically altered. Others might simply refuse to speak that way, having a conscious idea of how to resonate their voices to sound feminine. Elmore went into this project with a simplistic model for what a trans woman looks like, one where their transness is obvious, like a drag queen, but that doesn't always correspond with reality, and that gives this film a surreal tone. Elmore makes the stylistic decision to never use the word transgender. This This oblique storytelling was popularized with the 1999 to 2007 series The Sopranos, which is about the mafia but never uses the words mafia or mob, just making its subject clear from context. This can be strong storytelling if done well, but it fails in bit for never making it clear in context that Laurel is trans. Laurel looks cisgender. If you didn't know going in that the film is about a transgender vampire, or who Nicole Maines is, it would be hard to follow. I'm sure there will be some cishet viewers who watch the film in total ignorance, ignore the bits that don't make sense, and then just roll their eyes at the people online trying to claim that Laurel is trans. My god, the queers are even claiming that vampires are trans! What's next? Neo in the Matrix? We fade in on Laurel's face, and we're supposed to instantly identify her as trans, but she doesn't look like it, so it just looks like the framing is identifying her as the protagonist. There's no twist to it. There's no punch. It's just, yeah, protagonist. Here you go. When a guy at a graduation party drunkenly tells her that he's proud of her, that she's an inspiration, it's unclear what he's talking about. Of course, we're supposed to get that she transitioned in high school relatively recently, but without this all-important context, it just looks like an awkward attempt at flirting. She gets out of there quickly because she doesn't like the attention, but it looks like she's just not into him. She talks to her gay friend, Andy, played by Matt Pierce, about her plan to move in with her older brother Mark in LA, until she decides what to do with her life. And Andy expresses sexual attraction toward Mark. She finds it gross because she doesn't like thinking about her brother that way, but the gay attraction has a great framing as fundamentally legitimate. That the two are friends illustrates queer friendship and how such like-minded people tend to find each other. Of course, without context, it looks like a standard straight woman and gay friend stereotype. Assuring her parents that she'll be okay, she drives to LA on her own.
Well, she's gone. Should we go have sex?
That is a good use of a simple gag to communicate an important story detail, that Laurel's parents respect her gender identity. They accept her as female to the extent that they use female pronouns when she's not there. That is a great model for the cisgender audience that no one understood because they never realized she's trans. 6 hours later, she makes it to her brother's apartment and crashes on the couch. Mark, played by James Paxton, brother of Bill Paxton, who played a vampire in 1987's Near Dark, wakes her up. While moping about not wanting to get up, she stretches her neck and, noticeably to those of us who know she's trans, doesn't have an Adam's apple, which is why she doesn't sound like a boy. I can imagine Elmore deciding in the moment to play that up to illustrate her femininity, but it also illustrates just why the opening fake-out doesn't work. Mark takes her to a club where the bouncer sniffs out her fake ID, but Duke is intrigued by Laurel and glamours the bouncer into thinking that it's legit.
Looks fine to me.
Looks fine to me.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
Without context, it just looks like Duke feels some basic lesbian attraction to her, and this is completely accurate. But as a twist, we're supposed to think that she's specifically intrigued by Laurel being trans, and that's questionable as an alluring villain trait. Fetishizing transness isn't really a form of respect.
I love transgender people. They're the most courageous people in the whole world.
They enter the club, where they split up and enjoy the live music. Death Valley Girls' I'm a Man Too, a feminist-themed anthem with a trans-sounding name. Through the concert, she finds her attention drawn by Duke. Her sex appeal is played up in a dominant lesbian way, styled on David Bowie's thin white Duke persona. It effectively captures a queer aesthetic with a bit of thematic androgyny borrowed from Bowie, and it's an example of Elmore's research paying off. While I'm sure that the straight male audiences wouldn't be disinterested, her appearance looks deliberately designed to drive lesbians wild. In contrast to Mother May I Sleep with Danger, going for straight male appeal first. I suspect this part is an homage to a scene in Lost Boys, where the protagonist goes to a concert with his brother and sees his love interest across the crowd, and she lures him to the vampire gang. Laurel goes to get a drink and gets a creepy old guy staring at her. This guy is a vampire hunter who has identified her as the vampire's target, but she just thinks that he's a creep who clocked her as trans. But of course, because Maines passes so well, this isn't effectively communicated to the cisheads. A pretty vampire named Izzy, played by Zoe Griggs, flirts with her, while Duke keeps a close eye on the situation. Izzy invites her to a party with the other vampires, and she accepts. The old guy warns her not to go, but she thinks he's just a creep and rejects him. The vampires take her to a warehouse that they have taken over and turned into their clubhouse to throw parties and lure victims. Laurel notices the oubliette where they threw Siren, and Izzy distracts her with a smug smile that reminds me a bit of the web series Carmilla. She leads her up to the roof to share a romantic evening, and they chat about themselves. Izzy has her life together as an indie hip-hop producer, but Laurel has no idea what she wants to do, explaining that she has anhedonia, a symptom of clinical depression involving a decreased ability to feel pleasure. This makes sense in context of being a trans teen, but could also make sense for a teen in general. Of course, depression can make you feel like a form of living dead, and it works as a thematic parallel to the literal vampirism. Dracula's Daughter did it way back in 1936, and Bit may be considered a creative descendant, especially with the lesbian vampire part. Izzy and Laurel kiss and interlace their fingers. It's very sweet. Meanwhile, Duke plays pool with a couple of guys and suggests that they have sex in a three-way, phrased in such a way that positions her as the dominant figure. She initiates but still essentially allows them to have sex with her, if they are ready and willing, which of course they are. It is a masterful flip on gender roles. Instead of degrading her as a slut, the framing honors her for her sexual prowess, and leads us to scrutinize if these guys can really handle her. Spoiler, they can't. Duke handcuffs one guy to the bed and takes off his pants, but finds that he isn't fully erect, so she starts off by making out with his friend and gets bitey. It's made clear that vampire bites are orgasmic for both parties, and also brutally painful for the victim, in a classic BDSM theme, also rendered with a literal bondage. After killing the friend, she rounds on the first guy and explains that she specifically targeted him because she knows that he raped a girl and got away with it. That she knows because she read his mind. And she'll kill him soonish, letting him wallow in terror a bit before she finally does. This is similar to the Vampire Clan in Mother May I Sleep with Danger, specifically going after rapey guys to kill in sexy ways, with Duke particularly resembling the Vampire Queen. However, while that is heavily played up for the male gaze, Bit manages to make it sexy without sexually objectifying Duke. Her androgyny is used to lend her respect, similar to that of a male subject. Her pattern of murder even resembles that of Lestat from Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, with mind reading to get a confirmation of guilt. As Duke enjoys herself, Laurel and Izzy's romantic evening continues. Laurel tries to commit to the relationship, but Izzy rejects her, saying it's just a one-night stand. Laurel awkwardly heads out, and Izzy bites her from behind, as if to forcibly consummate their one-night stand in a metaphor for sexual assault. As part of this, we get a good look at Laurel looking like she's experiencing an orgasm. It's an interesting detail, as women's sexual pleasure is often considered especially dirty by our repressive patriarchal culture, and films will often avoid women's orgasm phases to keep from getting an NC-17 rating, which would greatly diminish the financial returns in a standard theatrical release. By virtue of opting for no rating and a release through streaming sites, the film avoids this sexist portrayal of women's sexuality. However, the progressivism is of course lessened by the fact that it's a rape metaphor and not a consensual sexual encounter. Just when Izzy starts to gulp up the last of Laurel, Duke intervenes. She makes it clear what's going on and tosses Laurel off the side of the building, fittingly into a pile of trash. Duke's apparent sexual interest in Laurel at the same time as Izzy's, without any clear rivalry between the two, gives the dynamic an air of polyamory. In this scene, they effectively abuse her together, and when she wakes up the next day, the tone is one of a victim of abuse stumbling home after a rape. When Mark questions her, she gives the excuse of,
I fell.
the classic assault victims claim. While most audiences wouldn't even question if she were a woman, thanks to Maine's passability, it's probable that Elmore wrote this scene with the expectation that audiences would have difficulty accepting her as one. By being sexually assaulted, Laurel is forcibly put into a traditional feminine gender role, while the serious betrayal leads the audience to take it seriously. While the goal of getting viewers to accept Laurel as a woman is commendable, it is questionable that Elmore chose the negative side of the female gender role in presenting Laurel as vulnerable to sexual abuse, instead of embracing a positive aspect of femininity. By being placed into the traditionally masculine role of sexual abusers, Duke and Izzy are also further defined in androgyny. It's at least interesting for playing with gender roles, if not terribly progressive in itself. Laurel sleeps for a full day. Mark tries to get her to eat, but she barfs up the human food that he gives her. She goes back to sleep and has a genuinely creepy nightmare about her teeth falling out, a safe, the oubliette, Laurel standing in a nightgown that emphasizes her sexual vulnerability, Duke with blood on her mouth, and Laurel puking blood into the oubliette, before waking up late at night as the vampires arrive to collect her. Mark innocently lets them in, only wearing underwear to appeal to the straight girls watching, while the dominant vampires, intimidating the submissive new recruit in pure energy and not overt sexual displays, appeals to the lesbians watching. No straight male appeal in sight. I do like that female focus. The vampires take her back to the warehouse. She asks a few pertinent questions.
Were you gonna kill me?
Does that scare you?
Not really.
Why not?
My life's already kind of been like a horror movie.
If you understand that Laurel is trans, that is an emotionally impactful statement. She already faced the horror of gender dysphoria and struggled to transition. Now she feels such anhedonia that the threat of death isn't a big deal. She is barely living to begin with. The scene frames the trans struggle in an empathetic, validating light, and of course, most people didn't realize she's trans, and the whole scene seems meaningless. Without that highly important context, she just comes off as a whiny teenager, giving the audience zero reason to empathize with her. At the warehouse, they give her a bottle containing a clear liquid and tell her that it's a cure. If she takes it before she makes her first kill, she'll turn back into a human. Incidentally, the cure in The Lost Boys is also contingent on doing it before making your first kill. Just saying. Faced with this choice, she asks about the whole killing thing. Duke clarifies that, yes, she would have to kill people. Yes, this includes innocent people. Yes, Duke and Izzy were going to kill her. Why? Because eating people you find hot makes the blood taste better, underlining the vampire bite as rape metaphor subtext. While this burned her a couple scenes ago, the framing is now less serious and more whimsical, as it embraces the rape fantasy, both giving and receiving, plot device common in sexy vampire works, like True Blood. Setting that aside for a moment, Duke sells Laurel on joining the vampire gang by appealing to her feminine insecurities. While more of a terrorist organization than a real legitimate feminist movement, Duke's gang mostly targets misogynists, letting rumors spread of evil, man-hating women stalking LA's male population to turn the tables and make them afraid to go out at night. It's saying the quiet part out loud for the vampire clan in Mother May I Sleep with Danger, and it adds an interesting quality of gender politics to Bit. While Duke is sexy and charismatic, the film does not shy away from acknowledging her as a villain. What she and her gang do is unambiguously bad, yet it is intriguing and it's not a feminist ideology. They aren't, strictly speaking, feminists, but their thought processes are authentically feminine, in a way of feminist significance, touching on subjects that feminist philosophers have explored. I've talked about pseudo-feminist villains a lot in these reviews, from the invading matriarchal aliens in Catwomen of the Moon, to the gender-siding fascists of Last Man on Planet Earth, to the women who keep men as slaves in Planet Earth. and they're all a bizarre extrapolation of men's fears of feminism, not just turning the tables, but enacting revenge that goes 10 times farther than patriarchy ever has. Patriarchy in its current form is presented as a base assumption of what a good society looks like, with both extreme misogyny and extreme misandry presented as the only alternate options, and both villainous. Audiences are led to get behind heroic men as they oppose pseudo-feminist women and bring them under goodly subjugation, and thereby assert patriarchy as a goodly status quo. However, Bit betrays the pseudo-feminist angry women seeking revenge from a position of great sympathy, authentically centering a trans woman familiar with the ways that patriarchy makes life worse for women. She knows that the world is deeply flawed, and the audience is led to accept this standpoint. Accepting the status quo is bad. Something needs to be done. What Duke is offering is a bad reaction to a bad situation, but she's alluring to Laurel in a way that makes her sympathetic to her and to the audience, because it's rooted in respect for women suffering under patriarchy.
We're politically, socially, and mythologically fucked.
Duke describes the female body as being seen as strange and other, horrific from the standpoint of the patriarchal mainstream. Sigmund Freud notably described the female form as horrific from his perspective as a man, for representing a horrific state of lacking male genitalia, inspiring terror in men that they might lose their own genitalia. He extrapolated this idea to suggest that all misogyny and villainous female figures are attributable to male fears of castration. Male philosophers and psychologists studying horror have tended to uphold Freud's interpretation of villainous women symbolically representing the fear of castration by virtue of themselves lacking male genitalia and acting against men. However, feminist philosopher Susan Lurie has suggested that what really unsettles men is the concept of women lacking male genitalia and flourishing without them, thereby undermining the assumption that men are innately powerful. This assertion, published in a 1981 essay, has largely influenced the direction of feminist discourse on the subject since. Likewise, Duke describes how the female body is seen as horrific and says that she owns the horror and takes empowerment from it. As she speaks, this resonates with Laurel. Duke's own engagement with the subject of female body horror as a cisgender woman is different from Laurel's engagement as a transgender woman. We can imagine that she views her natural masculine form as horrific and has fought tooth and nail to feminize it as much as she has, or is in the process of fighting tooth and nail, as it is implied that she is supposed to be much more clockable than Maines represents her, and that the cis-heteropatriarchy views her emergent femininity as itself horrific. The masculine form is upheld by patriarchy as the ideal human form, and here Laurel is destroying it to assert that the feminine form is superior in her eyes. That makes her appear monstrous to the mainstream, but in claiming her femininity as empowering, she owns that horrific femininity in a way parallel to Duke. While Duke is absolutely in charge, she makes a point of respecting the vampire subordinates' individualities. She says she won't control Laurel's life, just enforce a few basic rules. Kill what you eat, all new recruits are determined by her, and no male vampires ever, because men can't handle power. She believes the existence of patriarchy makes this self-evident.
What about me?
Never crossed my mind.
That is amazing. It is an incredibly validating statement for the film to make in presenting these extreme, man-hating rebels as accepting of trans women. It's implied that they know that Laurel is trans. Obviously, she's supposed to be more clockable than Maines, but we can imagine some superior vampire senses are involved. They just know that Laurel is a woman, regardless of her physiology. They don't care because they're enlightened queer women with feminist sentiments. They're kind of anti-TERFs in that regard. The obvious question, left unanswered at this point, is if Duke herself is all that good at handling power. Spoiler, no. Laurel warms up to Duke's invitation to join, so she gives her a test, kill someone. She brings out an extremely unsympathetic victim. A misogynistic alt-right troll with a penchant for harassing women online. Wow. Elmore sure knows how to endear his murderous vampire cult to me. Duke then compares Laurel needing to make her choice to Morpheus offering Neo the red and blue pills in The Matrix. I'm unclear if this was a deliberate allusion to the transgender subtext interpretation, which at that point was unconfirmed, but it's an interesting thematic coincidence either way. The trans woman stands to be empowered if she makes a certain choice. Take the red pill, Neo. Laurel drops the bottle and starts to go for the kill, but has too good a heart and backs out. Duke tries to badger her into making the kill, but she refuses, and Duke lets her run off to think things over. All in all, that's pretty reasonable. They go to feed on the troll, but his vampire hunter friends show up and attack. The troll runs and ends up passing Laurel, who realizes that something is wrong and goes back to help. Duke tries to hypnotize the lead vampire hunter, but it doesn't work.
Your mental bullshit ain't gonna work on me, Snowflake.
That is actually kind of hilarious.
I'm linked to the master.
No. No? Ew, no. Definitely not. Getting warmer.
Hi! It's really nice to have you back, Lester.
Strike that. Reverse it.
Well, basically. So yeah, Dracula's in this film. They call him Vlad and the Master, but he's basically Dracula. These manly men opposing the evil, man-hating she-vampires, the kind of guys who would typically take the role of hero in this genre, are just a bunch of misogynistic assholes working for one patriarchal asshole that's the opposite extreme of Duke and her gang. They don't even get the dignity of being self-motivated. They're his Renfield slaves. Perhaps an allusion to the Reddit trolls being manipulated by conservative politicians.
I will serve you, your excellent spookiness.
The result of casting these two as polar opposites positions Laurel in the neutral standpoint. She recognizes that there is a problem and that something must be done. This leads the audience to accept feminism as fundamentally a good thing, in rejecting the trolls and accepting Duke's premise that the world is broken and that something must be done. At the moment, Laurel likes Duke more than these jerkasses, so she tenuously chooses her side. After helping the vampires slaughter the unsympathetic victims, Laurel joins Duke on the roof to discuss what just happened. Duke fills her in on her backstory. Back in the 1970s, Duke was a teenage runaway who ended up homeless and needed to become a sex worker servicing men to survive, something deeply unpleasant for her as a lesbian. But she finally flourished as a rebellious punk, stealing girls away from their boyfriends because she's just that awesome. She fought for and achieved the life she wanted, something thematically compared to Laurel's journey to transition. However, Vlad, played by Greg Hill, who previously worked with Elmore on 3 other projects, found her and put her under his thrall, turning her into one of the brides of Dracula. They partied in an endless haze. Vlad is so powerful that he doesn't experience any low points, only a series of highs. It superficially seems like a good life, but it lacks the contrast that gives life meaning, and is the opposite extreme of Laurel's anhedonia, hedonism. Duke found the will to burn up Vlad's body, leaving only his heart. Another bride was loyal to him, so Duke killed her. The remaining bride, Siren, joined Duke, until her indiscretion prompted Duke to throw her in the oubliette, as we saw at the beginning of the film. To keep Vlad from resurrecting, Duke keeps his heart in a box in the vault, and eats slivers from it a little at a time to both keep Vlad weak and to absorb his essence, getting a bit of his voice in her head, but also getting his Dracula superpowers to remain firmly at the top of the pecking order. Duke takes Laurel flying, shows her the oubliette as a reminder not to cross her, and then Laurel and Izzy finally have a romantic night. Laurel blows off her friends and family and commits to the vampire lifestyle, or undeath style. She gets her own room at the warehouse, parties with the vampires, and joins Izzy for an art show where a man amuses them by explaining the extent of his male allyship. I suspect this guy is Elmore's self-insert, which isn't of great humility, but it's much preferable to James Franco's creepy ogling and Mother May I Sleep with Danger. In any case, Izzy eats him. Other vampires run stings to target rapists, where they pretend to pass out at warehouse parties, eating rapists when they make their move, on the supposedly helpless victims. It's an interesting concept that feminists have discussed with regard to law enforcement. Have a female cop pretend to get into a compromising situation, wait to see if anyone tries to take advantage of them, and have cops standing by to arrest them if they do. It's similar to the accepted practice of using bait cars. Cars that are easily stolen are planted in shady streets under covert surveillance, waiting for crooks to steal them so the cops can arrest them. However, cops adhere to a patriarchal model of policing that doesn't value women's autonomy. What the vampires do is a form of vigilantism, filling the gap of an inefficient police system and twisting the narrative to empower women. Laurel resists feeding and gets clumsy, getting bitey with a random woman on the street. She doesn't follow through with it, and Duke kills the woman in front of her, telling her to get with the program. Then Mark starts drama with her. He's fed up of being ignored when she is, apparently, just being selfish and hanging out with those cool LA friends, instead of being good to Andy and her family. While he is framed as sympathetic, having a decent point about the stress of Laurel's transition and associated family drama wearing him down, it progressively does not cast Laurel in a negative light for transitioning, and Mark's anger does not lead him to misgender her. Even in this tense conflict, her female gender is a given. The fight culminates in him calling her a bitch, which is an insult with sexist connotations, but one that respects her gender identity, and she bites him in anger. Oops. She comes out of it and drives him to the warehouse to demand that he be given the cure. Problem is, the blue pill is poison. That is to say, Duke handed her a bottle of Everclear, and if she said no, she was just going to kill her. My God, if you can't trust a murderous vampire cult, then who can you trust? Now that a man is going to become a vampire, that no boys clause comes into effect. The vampires stalk forward, and Laurel tells Mark to run and cuts her throat while standing over the oubliette. Siren drinks her blood, escapes, attacks, and then uses her blood to resurrect Vlad. Mark helps Laurel escape in the ruckus. However, she makes him turn the car around and go back. Despite everything, she is invested in these people's safety. Vlad immediately enthralls everyone, misquotes Chinatown, and complains about Duke slandering him as the villain of the piece. Well, of course, he has more depth than she made him out to have. Everyone thinks that they're the hero of the piece, but he's still a rapist who enslaves people and he can't see his own flaws. However, he is able to point out Duke's hypocrisy. She has been using his powers to enthrall her vampires and keep them in line. Now that she's exposed, her subordinates turn on her. Vlad considers raping her, but decides instead to kill her in revenge. He rips out her heart and tries to burn it. Before he can, Laurel returns and challenges him. He enthralls her and draws her closer, studies her, and comments on the whole transgender thing.
I suppose it is the new millennium.
Oh, come on. That's just ahistorical. Transgender people have been around for as long as there have been people. The ancient Greeks described transgender Scythian shaman. The ancient Sumerians had trans women sex workers and Inanna temple workers. The ancient Hindus held that there were 3 sexes, the third of which encompassing all LGBT identities. More in Vlad's time frame, the early Western gay rights movement of the latter 19th century didn't make a big distinction between being gay and being trans, with activist Karl Heinrich Ulrichs using the description, a female soul enclosed within a male body, to define what amount to gay men. The early 20th century saw the development of gender clinics associated with first-wave feminism, as trans women utilized the developing sciences to medically transition. The most famous Nazi book-burning photograph depicts the conservative backlash to the growing pro-trans sentiment, with them destroying a library dedicated to transgender science. In 1952, Christine Jorgensen's surgical transformation amazed America. The modern standpoint of antipathy is just an extended reactionary backlash that Vlad should not be subject to. He should be more familiar with transgender women than anyone. Oh well. At least it is vaguely accepting. He seems perfectly willing to take her as a sex slave. How flattering. The posing with his hand reached out to enthrall is an homage to the 1931 Dracula film. When Dracula tries it on Van Helsing, our intrepid hero, he starts to succumb, but resists. Likewise, Laurel ends up fighting back by sucking up the Everclear, lighting a flame, and spurting it in his face as a flamethrower, like Buffy does with hairspray. The other vampires help take down Vlad and reduce him to a heart once more. Duke, now completely disempowered, submissively crawls toward Laurel, who holds her heart. Laurel asks her to reconsider her stance on men, but she refuses, so Laurel chucks her heart in the oubliette, and Duke scampers after it. Maybe she'll reconsider in a few years. Now effectively the new leader, Laurel makes some changes to the rules. Men are now allowed in the group.
Just because you're a dude doesn't mean you have an excuse to become a shithead.
And they all eat from Vlad's heart, all being fundamentally equal. Instead of simply ruling justly, she recognizes that the hierarchy itself is problematic and dismantles it. It's an anarchist message you don't usually see in this kind of things, and it emphasizes her victory. She muses with Mark that she may want to implement some widespread recruitment program to enact feminist social change in the future, and with that sequel hook, the credits roll. Laurel gets all meta and addresses the audience, noting that if there are sequels, she won't get pregnant like Bella in Breaking Dawn, a trans joke that no one understood. And so concludes Bit. I like this one. It's a decent male ally feminist work, shades of Buffy, with modern politics and a strong lesbian-aimed lesbian vampire plot. Shades of the Carmilla movie. However, it suffers as a queer narrative by miscasting the lead for this kind of plot. Maine's as great as trans superhero Dreamer on Supergirl, where she plays a trans woman who easily passes.
I am also a trans woman.
But that's not what Laurel is supposed to be, and with that misstep, the whole thing basically falls apart. The lack of clarity keeps mainstream audiences from even understanding what's going on. Further, Elmore's lack of personal investment denies the film the narrative thrust of, say, The Matrix. But overall, it's fun, progressive, and I for one hope there is a sequel. I'll even be satisfied if she does get pregnant somehow. Just no adult werewolves falling in love with babies. That's a step too far. Please like, share, subscribe, and consider donating to my Patreon. Pledges of $2 or more will earn you an explicit thank you at the end of each video. Thank you.